Rob, Adrian, thanks very much for joining us on the Intelligence Fusion podcast. I guess the first question is, who are you guys and why did you set up Tracelabs?
You want me to go first, Adrian?
Yeah, sure, Rob.
Sure. Okay. My name's Robert Sell. I'm the president and founder of Tracelabs. And, in search and rescue, I go out and look for a lot of different people. And, during one of those searches, I think I was thinking about several different things. One of them is all the searches that we don't do for people that are out there missing. And I found that quite often nobody is looking for these people. So the idea of scale kept going around in my mind. How can we use technology to better scale? Seemed kind of low tech the way we were doing it, with 4 people out in the bush, maybe in a position where that person may or may not have been. And there was a search that we did once called the Tyler Wright search, and it was the biggest search in BC history. And they used helicopters to survey the area, and they took video of it, and they used crowdsourcing on the video to have people watch the videos and report any weird things that they may have seen. And I always remember that as a really good example of crowdsourcing and a way to use scale. So that kind of started the idea for me. And then at that time, it was just an idea. And then really going out in the community, which has a lot of wonderful people in it, meeting people like Adrian and James, who really helped develop the idea to what it is today. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Adrian.
Yeah, so my name's Adrian Korn. I'm the Director of OSINT Operations at Tracelabs. When I originally joined the organization, it was very early on. Shortly after Rob came up with the idea, was looking to really execute and host the first ever OSINT search party CTF out there in the world. So Rob and I kind of partnered up. I was running the DEF CON Toronto chapter. It's a mid-sized cybersecurity meetup group based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And Rob and I partnered up to actually run, one of these CTFs, Capture the Flag events, back in July 2018. That's really where we got together, started executing on this concept. And then ever since then, it's just over 2 years later, we've done many more events and many more successes, and really happy to see the growth of this organization over that time.
So just for people who aren't aware of the term crowdsourcing, can you just explain what you mean by that? And also, you mentioned sort of the CTF, which is Capture the Flag. The gamification side of it seems to be quite interesting when it comes to crowdsourcing. Can you just explain a bit about why you do it as CTFs as well?
Yeah, so the term crowdsourcing is really just describing having a number of people tackling one problem. So you have more than one person working on a problem, typically, where they're all putting their resources together to expedite the solving of that problem. That's probably the simplest way to describe it. So one example of crowdsourcing out there in the space that uses open source intelligence in addition to us is this project started by Europol called the Trace an Object Initiative. And what they do is they'll post up an image that's related to some missing person or trafficking activity out there. And they'll get all these people on the internet to actually crowdsource, essentially figuring out where that image is in the world and figuring out what they know about it. That's one example of crowdsourcing out there. What we're doing at Tracelabs is we're actually taking on real missing persons cases, and we're crowdsourcing a collection of open source intelligence on those cases through what we call a Capture the Flag event. And this is really gamified through this Capture the Flag to motivate all these skilled investigators, cybersecurity professionals, even law enforcement to come in there and try their best to find any new leads using only this OSINT information. And really, the CTF concept comes from the cybersecurity community. For many years, ethical hackers have competed against each other in simulated ethical hacking environments to essentially find flags in intentionally vulnerable servers and systems, just for competition and training aspects. But really what we've tried to do here with Tracelabs is pair that type of experience with a CTF, bring OSINT into the equation, and then also the search and rescue concepts that Rob has been, doing for years, and merge that into what we call the OSINT search party CTF.
And so just on that, so is Tracelabs really mainly formed of cybersecurity and information security professionals, or do you get people from other disciplines as well?
Oh, it's really interesting, the breakup of our community. We have, cybersecurity professionals, we have students, we have people who don't even work in the tech industry who are assisting. Because we're only using open source intelligence, the barrier to entry is actually very low. It's lower than what most people might think. To do good OSINT, you don't need to be very technical. You don't need to have, computer science degree or anything like that. You really just need to be good at asking questions, knowing where to find answers to those questions in relation to searching online, using tools just like Google, Facebook, any forums, any search engines out there. If you can navigate those, you can be good at OSINT. So because of that, our variety of members is so vast, I'd say, not just technical members.
Yeah, we've really done a good job, I think, of developing the platform so that the user experience is really nice for both a total beginner, someone who's never done open source intelligence before, and then also your experts, right? And we get both in our events, which is great. And we'll have teams comprised of both, which really leads to great dynamics, great mentoring, and things like that, which really help build our community quite well, I find. So we get people ask us, they say, hey, I'm a beginner. I've never done open source intelligence before. Am I really in a position to be able to do this event and have a good time and contribute? And we always encourage people to just go for it. Team up with other people if you can that have done it before. They'll help you if you can. If not, just form a team and go for it. And we've never seen a bad experience as a result of that. It's always been very rewarding for people. And regardless of experience, they have a good time.
And can you just sort of explain broadly how the Tracelabs competitions go? Because I kind of participated on the Mandalorian team through a former colleague of mine from the intelligence corps, but we had a couple of other guys who were on our team who were from a more generic open source intelligence background. But what I was really impressed with was the tools and resources that go with the competition, the virtual machine, all the tools and open source resources that were on there. I found them to be really interesting. There was a lot that I just never heard of. So for me personally, it was a great experience to be part of one of these CTF events. So yeah, I mean, can you just sort of run us through just generally how these Tracelabs events actually work?
Yeah, so essentially when we run one of our big OSINT search party CTFs, the way we typically run them now is they're fully virtual, especially in 2020 with this new COVID era we're living in. They're fully virtual, open to the public. Anyone can sign up and join. And what people do is they form a team of anywhere between 1 to 4 people. So we have some people who prefer to participate on their own, some who prefer to have a larger team. And essentially, people will form these teams. And when we start the actual CTF, they will be given anywhere from 5 to 12 missing persons cases, typically from around the world when we do these virtual events. And the way these cases are brought to us are typically through our various law enforcement partners we have around the world. So the law enforcement partners will typically come to us and say, hey, we have this one missing persons case. There's a lot of digital footprint activity on this one, and we think that your community with their open source intelligence capabilities can probably assist in finding new leads. And they'll provide that case to us, and then we'll publish that through our CTF. So when the CTF itself actually starts and the participants see the cases, they'll also see our 9 flag categories we have that they're going to be looking to collect all this open source intelligence against. And really a flag would just be one potential new lead on the case. So we have categories of flags for friends, family, employment. We have more advanced categories that go into things like tracking down IP addresses, phone numbers, license plates of vehicles, stuff like that. And then we have even more advanced categories where our members are venturing into the dark web to collect intelligence. And then we also have a category we call location, where people are looking to actively geolocate where a missing person is right now at that point in time. So essentially how it works in the CTF is these participants will collect these flags. They'll submit it to our custom search party platform that we've developed in-house. And that flag will go into kind of a pending status initially. And what we have on the back end of that is we have a very large group of volunteer judges, we call them, who are actually going to be going through all those flags in real time and ensuring that they're as accurate as possible, that they relate to the case they were submitted for, that they're, sourceable open source intelligence, meaning that they have some public link that we can look at to actually verify where that came from. And there's also some relevance and an explanation, any supporting evidence as well that can be provided with that lead. And our judges will go through that. They'll validate it. If it's valid, they'll score that team points according to that category for the OSINT. If it's not relevant, they won't accept it, but they'll actually provide feedback over to that team who submitted it to give them an idea of how they could maybe resubmit that and make it better intelligence, or maybe something else that they could focus on instead that would be higher value to that case. And then essentially at the end of this whole competition, once all our flags are verified, which typically happens within 1 hour of the end of these CTFs, we'll crown a winning team, whoever has the most points on the scoreboard. And then typically they will win a prize, which is typically some type of training voucher for some cybersecurity training, or even special tool access. One example is, we actually have Intelligence Fusion, you guys as a sponsor of ours, where you provide your Intelligence Fusion subscription as a prize for one of the winning teams. So that's essentially how our CTFs work in a nutshell.
And so once that intelligence has been gathered as part of the CTF, what happens to it after the competition?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's really 3 parts to how we work a missing person case. There's the people who collect the intelligence initially during the CTF. There's our judges who verify it. And then there's this third step that happens behind the scenes after CTF, where we have a intelligence reporting team internally at Tracelabs. It's comprised of about 10 volunteers who actually take a third look at every lead that was submitted throughout that CTF. And in a typical CTF we run, we get anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 leads actually submitted to us. So that's actually like a prime example of the power of crowdsourcing with our concept, that you can get an exponential amount of leads in just a short period of time, typically 6 hours for one of our events. So our intelligence reporting team will go through that, do some additional validation, and then they'll summarize all those leads into custom intelligence reports that we will send directly to the law enforcement agency responsible for each case. That's kind of that second or third step after our event.
So there's real sort of intelligence rigor within this process. It's going through multiple steps of collection and verification prior to that then being handed off at the end. I mean, the crowdsourcing side, I think it's a fascinating concept. It's something that I've been banging on about for years. And it now seems to be a lot more people are actually starting to engage with it a lot more. From our perspective as a private intelligence company with a platform that's recording incidents ranging from criminality all the way up to terrorism and conflict, we'll see a terrorist incident that occurs, and then somebody will create a Reddit thread, and suddenly you've got 200 people who are out there actively trying to find information in relation to that incident. And it's amazing how quickly and efficient they are at actually gathering that information. So what do you think was the hardest part about really setting up this crowdsourced community that you have at Tracelabs?
I think the hardest part to me was the challenge of crowdsourcing, right? So as you mentioned, crowdsourcing can be super powerful as you bring in the different people, but there's some principles around it. In search and rescue, we're always wanting to scale. We always want what we call convergent volunteers to come in and help us with a search if we can. But we're always worried, of course, that if we send people off into the woods, then we're going to have more people lost, more people injured as a result of that. And I think the same thing, the same concern, the same risk applies to our organization and to any organization that wants to do crowdsourcing. We want to utilize that, the engine of crowdsourcing, but we also want to be very careful with the limits of that, I think, or the scope of that. And so with Tracelabs, we're very careful how we created our organization and how we set that scope. And that's really important on several levels, right? Not only to the risk of the contestants, but also the risk of the people that are missing, right? And the investigation that's going on. So for example, we do what's called passive reconnaissance or zero touch recon, where we're not engaging at all. Our contestants are not permitted to engage. It's strictly reconnaissance, passive reconnaissance. And so as a result, that kind of sets the scope. So we're not interfering with an active investigation. We're not going to cause any confusion or any concern with the parents or the person that's missing. And that's really important, right? It's really preventing the equivalent of the person in SAR where they go off into the woods and hurt themselves or become missing themselves, right? So I kind of always draw that comparison. How do we utilize everybody that wants to do good, everybody that wants to help, but yet keep everybody safe? And I think that that's really important whenever you're doing crowdsourcing. So everybody wants to utilize that power, but we also want to make sure that we're doing good and keeping everybody safe. So that, to me, that's been the main challenge. And I think we've done that fairly well.
Yeah, I would just add to kind of what Rob said there. I think another one of our greatest challenges has been refining the process we have to crowdsource the collection and verification of all this intelligence we're gathering. It's been, 2.5 years, Rob, I think, since we started and, the process. And it's a constant, refinement of it with every CTF we do, with every operation, we're constantly refining it. And probably to the outside, it looks like we're just running, CTF, but there's a lot of inner workings that go on the back end that are constantly being updated and refined to ensure, a safe experience for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we take a lot of feedback from the community. I find that we've gone from an idea to this organization and now almost to this community grassroots movement where we have the community, and it's a large community, right? We're over 10,000 members in Slack, which is pretty phenomenal in that short amount of time. And everybody after every event is contributing to the evolution of the concept, right? So helping us with the category refinement and the processes and everything like that. So every event is so much better than the last one, which is pretty amazing.
You think from the police's perspective, this is bringing real weight of people to kind of look at these issues and try to find where these people are actually located. And with COVID and the financial impact, you'd imagine that police budgets are probably going to be cut over the next 12 months. So probably going to see even less resource being thrown at missing people. What has been the reaction of the police and the services who actually conduct the official searches for missing people with regards to Tracelabs and the work that you guys have been doing?
Yeah, so when we first actually started Tracelabs and the concept, we had one law enforcement agency interested and really on board. That was actually the Toronto Police. They were there at our first event, actually. And although they were the first agency to come on board, we found it a little bit difficult to get other agencies on board shortly after. It was more of this, trust thing, them saying, who are Tracelabs? Can we trust them? And all this. However, over the past 2 years, we've exponentially grown the law enforcement partnerships, and we've gone from, us trying to reach out to them approaching us almost weekly, I'd say, where they're looking for help with their cases. the service we provide to them is 100% free. There's no charge. We're a not-for-profit organization. So they are starting to see that they're able to get, free potential new leads at no additional cost, or dipping into any budgets internally. And the feedback has been tremendous. So in, one of our CTFs, we can work on one case and find potentially 50 new leads on one case that agency didn't have before. And the reason why we're able to find these leads is because we're using crowdsourcing. We have anywhere from 500 to 700 people looking at one case throughout 6 hours or more than one case. So they're definitely going to find stuff that might not have been seen before. Also, when it comes to cold cases, if we're working on any cold cases that maybe haven't been as actively investigated over the past few years, our community is able to come in and look to see if there's any new digital footprint activity from that missing person that might not have been looked at yet. So really, like in summary, the feedback has been tremendous from law enforcement. We've helped close out some cases already where we've found new online activity from a missing person where they actually didn't know if they were, alive or dead at that time. So that actually helps. We've also helped to confirm if a missing person is deceased or not through some open source investigation. So really, we're helping to reopen cold cases, close them, and further investigations out there for these agencies.
Yeah, I think also just to add to that, Adrian, one of the special bits of feedback that I received was when a law enforcement officer had said that even if we don't provide any new leads, which is rare, but even if that was to occur, the validation that 500 to 700 people spent 6 hours and didn't find anything new, I think that even then it's of high value because you're able to go back to the parents and say, look, we did everything possible. They didn't cover it. They didn't discover any new leads. So, and I think that really helps validate that initial effort, which is great. So, yeah, just an extra little bit there.
That's a really interesting aspect. And can you give us an example of where Tracelabs has actually found a person?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one case we're actually working on back in 2019. I remember it was in Toronto, and there was this gentleman, he was missing for 2 years at that point. And the case had gone cold. No one had found anything, but we put our community on it. I remember we were hosting a fairly small event, probably only 50 participants in Toronto. This was an in-person event at the B-Sides Toronto conference, actually. And within 2 hours of the event, one of our participants was able to track down a YouTube video that had footage of the missing person getting into this truck. And in the video, if you stopped at the right moment, you could see the license plate of that truck. So we actually had Toronto police in the room with us for this event, which is, really great to have them on board in person. And we were able to provide them this license plate in real time. They were able to run it. They got an address. They dispatched a squad car. And within a few days of follow-up investigation, they were actually able to confirm the location of that missing person, all because of that one lead that our participant found looking at that YouTube video, which was truly amazing to see. This is a 2-year cold case coming to a resolution just because of one YouTube video. Think about that for a moment.
Just moving on and kind of looking at Tracelabs going forward, what's the plan for Tracelabs and where do you sort of see it evolving in the future?
Right. So right now we have some new initiatives actually going on at Tracelabs. Really, like our primary focus is always to crowdsource a collection of OSINT to help find missing people and assist law enforcement. But what we've found is that something that actually helps with that is to provide back better training to our community to help them to further their skill sets to help on these investigations. So something we've actually launched recently is a new blog on our website where we're actually crowdsourcing OSINT content creators around the world to share back techniques and methodologies with our community to elevate their skill sets. We're also doing regular webinars now to educate members of the community on things like how do you create an alternate social media account, or also known as a sock puppet? These are really key in OSINT investigations, because when you're looking at social media profiles and such, you want to be doing it from an account that's not linked to you, so that you're not giving away your identity in that investigation. So we've run actually a 2-hour webinar on that. Something else we launched actually today, as we're recording this podcast, is our new Tracelabs podcast as well. It's called Breadcrumbs. So we're looking to share back more OSINT content through interviews with people in the OSINT space. So really where we're looking to take everything is providing back more to the community in terms of OSINT content and training, to really expedite our investigations and provide better value to law enforcement and such.
Yeah, that's great. The only thing I would add to that is really our continued effort to modernize and approach it from a global perspective. And we're really seeing our community really help out as well. Like Adrian said, with all those initiatives, a lot of those have come from the community, those ideas and the effort to help drive that forward. And so it's really been great. So 2021 is going to be very exciting for us.
And you said that, previously that, Robert, you're part of a search and rescue team, and that's in part where the idea came for Tracelabs. Do you see there being a point in the future where, countries and regions around the world all have their own online search and rescue teams doing Tracelabs type activity?
Yeah, we're starting to see that already to some extent. And so we're starting to see more training for search and rescue members to do open source intelligence. And it's really a key component to that now. We're seeing the whole industry change slowly, but we're getting there, which is great. We're seeing the modernization of how we do searches. An example of that is we're using helicopters more to pull people out quicker. We're using their cell phones to ping them to find out where they are, because there's greater coverage of that. But then also we're using open source intelligence to take a look at where they might be going hiking, to see if they've actually posted pictures of that particular hike. Things like that, which we never did even a couple of years ago. So that's really exciting. And then we're seeing that also transfer over from first responders more and more into law enforcement, and not just specialty areas within law enforcement, but general areas as well, right? Where open source intelligence can be very beneficial for almost anything. I'm finding it's a great tool, very quick to use, provided that you have those basic skill sets to be able to execute that in a timely fashion. And that's another thing that our community is helping to drive at a global level. So law enforcement, first responders are very regional typically, and providing all of them with this universal training is one of the mandates that we have, and we're seeing a really good reception to that so far.
I guess a big part of crowdsourcing, it's, for us, it's always about context. It's getting that local context, because it's all well and good us sitting in the northeast of England and reporting on an incident that occurred in Brazil, but a Brazilian will look at that incident in a very different way, and will find things that are, we just wouldn't think of, because we don't have that local context. So I guess, a big part for Tracelabs is just expanding that community and just sort of increasing the amount of people who you bring to these problems, in order to then try and find solutions and try and find these people.
Exactly, Michael. That's a really good point, that context matters, and someone local to the area of a missing person would have a different perspective on what intelligence might be out there. And something that's so great about our community is that we probably have coverage on every continent in the world, where there's someone in our community participating in a CTF who's going to be from there. So it feels like no matter what type of missing persons case we post up, whether it's from the UK, North America, somewhere in Europe, wherever it might be, we always have at least one member who's going to be local to that area and be able to provide that perspective. The same thing also goes for our volunteer judge team. Our judges, we typically get up to 100 judges helping us out with one event, and our judges come from around the world as well. So when they're reviewing all this intelligence, they're having that correct context based on if they're local to that case.
Yeah, it's amazing when we do a webinar, for example, and we open up the webinar and we say, welcome everyone. And everybody starts coming in the chat window and say hello and say, oh, where are you from? And every city you can imagine. It's just, that's my favorite part of doing a webcast, actually, is where you see that stream of locations. And it's surprising how diverse it is. It's really cool.
And some people might find it strange that there's actually, you guys have awards for these events, but it seems like gamification is really key to crowdsourcing because it gets people to actually engage with it. And, in part, fantastic. We're actually out there and trying to find somebody who's missing and doing something of value. But also there's that competitive edge as part of the event, which I think seems to be really key when it comes to crowdsourcing.
Yeah, crowdsourcing is really important. I think it's important to realize that the people that are in our events are there to help. And even when the event is over, they often want to keep going. And there's a strong passion there to help those people that are missing. So I think even without the gamification, to a certain level, we would have a great attendance. But I think the gamification definitely helps drive that. I kind of see that as the fuel to the engine, right? So you've got the crowdsourcing as the engine, and you've got the gamification as the fuel to that engine to some extent. And so it definitely helps. And we've been very strategic as well around our awards as well, having the most recent one really helping us to drive high quality submissions as well. So that most valuable Intel award is really cool. So not only do you get an award if you win, but also you can get an award if you supply some really cool intel, which is helping with the reports that we then give to law enforcement.
And that's the event that we sponsor. The work that you guys do, I think, is amazing. The real value that you're providing and actually helping to find people is fantastic. So where can people find out more about Tracelabs?
Yeah, so the best place to go is firstly our website. That's tracelabs.org. From there, you can follow us on our various social media. We're on Twitter at Tracelabs. We're on LinkedIn as well. But the next best place to go would really be our global Slack community. And you can actually join our public Slack group just by going to the link on our website. It's on the bottom. It's on the footer. And in our Slack group, we have active discussion going on about various OSINT tools, techniques, all things Tracelabs, all our initiatives we're working on. We have probably over 10,000 members right now as well. So if you join our Slack group and want to get involved and learn more, that's the best place to go and start the conversation.
Thanks very much for your time today. And I wish you all the best with Tracelabs and your continued success going forward.
Thank you very much for having us.
Fantastic. Thanks very much.